Imagine a quiet southern night where a proud U.S. Army general in crisp civilian attire steps out of her vehicle, only to be confronted by local officers who see nothing but the color of her skin. They ignore the bars of rank, the years of service, the quiet dignity in her eyes. In a flurry of raised voices and tightened cuffs, they commit a mistake that will cost them dearly. For this is Brigadier General Ebony Gardner. One phone call from her to the Pentagon can rock an entire police department. And before the dust settles, these racist cops will learn exactly whose career is about to be destroyed. It was a sticky summer evening in Crestwood, a small North Carolina town nestled just off the interstate that many travelers used en route to larger cities. Yellow streetlights buzzed the air thick with humidity and swirling mosquitoes. Brigadier General Ebony Gardner had driven through these roads countless times. She knew where to slow down for the potholes, where the local high school kids hung out, and even which gas station had the best sweet tea. But tonight, she felt the old sense of unease creeping up her spine. Fort Bragg was less than an hour away, and Ebony was heading there the next morning to oversee important training exercises for new recruits. Having grown up in a neighboring county, Ebony chose to stay with her elderly aunt each time she was in the area. On this particular night, she had visited a local community center to speak about leadership discipline and the path that took her from a modest background to becoming one of the Army's most respected generals. She was no stranger to adversity. Standing at 5 feet 10 inches, Ebony had a poised, upright bearing that always seemed to radiate command. Her mahogany skin glowed in the reflection of her SUV's dashboard. A confident calm enveloped her wherever she went. People either admired her or found themselves intimidated. Ebony accepted both reactions with equanimity. As she turned onto a dimly lit street, Ebony noted a pair of headlights in her rearview mirror. A police cruiser had begun following her. She'd done nothing wrong, she was certain of that, but experience taught her not to make assumptions. Even though she wore civilian clothes, the ring on her finger bore the Army crest and her wallet held her military ID. She had learned through decades of service that sometimes none of that mattered to certain people. The cruiser continued tailing her, matching her speed as she made a right turn toward her aunt's neighborhood. Though Ebony kept her composure, tension coiled in her chest. When the flashing red and blue lights finally came on, she exhaled slowly, murmuring a silent prayer that this encounter would be nothing more than a routine stop. She pulled over, turned off the engine, and rested her hands on the steering wheel. Nighttime stops were always a gamble. As Ebony watched the approaching figure in the side mirror, she resisted the urge to fish for her identification prematurely. She knew the procedure. Wait until told. The officer tapped on her window. Ebony lowered it just enough to see him clearly. Sergeant Ray Wilcox, according to his badge. In the background, a second officer hovered by the passenger side, shining a flashlight into the back seat. "What are you doing here this late?" Wilcox demanded. His tone was curt, less a question and more an accusation. "I'm on my way to my aunt's house." Ebony replied evenly. "I live just outside of Crestwood, but tonight I'm staying here with family." Wilcox's mouth twisted. License and registration. Ebony produced her driver's license and the registration for her SUV. She also slid her military ID toward him, a subtle indication that she was a member of the armed forces. Perhaps it might quell any hostility. Wilcox barely glanced at the ID before snorting. "You got any contraband in this vehicle?" His voice carried a challenge. "No, officer," she said. "You have my registration and my record is clean." Wilcox handed her ID to his partner, Officer Kurt Lawson, who scanned it with narrowed eyes. There was no greeting, no courtesy. Ebony's skin prickled, but she kept her voice polite. She was used to being in high-stakes negotiations, controlling her breathing, even under the threat of mortar fire. But this was different, a domestic confrontation that felt personal, invasive. She was about to explain why she was in Crestwood, part of her community outreach, a speaking engagement at the local center, when Wilcox cut her off. Step out of the vehicle, Ebony paused, uncertain. She'd seen traffic stops escalate too quickly, especially for black drivers. Memories of cautionary videos and community warnings flashed in her mind. Her best approach was calm compliance. "May I ask why you need me out of the vehicle, Sergeant?" "You're being detained for questioning," he snapped. "On what grounds?" Ebony asked, controlling her tone. It was a measured query, a simple request for clarity. The officer's reply crackled with impatience. "We had a report of a suspicious vehicle matching your description." Ebony wanted to protest that her SUV was a late-model black Ford Explorer, the type everyone drives, hardly unique. Still, she complied. Exiting her vehicle, she saw Lawson circle around, placing a hand on his holster. The oppressive humidity seemed to thicken around them, the tension crackling like static in the air. "Face the car," Wilcox ordered. Ebony lifted her chin, but followed the directive. Before she could utter another word, she felt Wilcox's hands roughly pulling her wrists behind her back, clasping cold steel around them. The clasp bit into her skin. The sound of the cuffs ratcheting closed felt surreal, a humiliating step far beyond a normal traffic stop. She tried to remain composed, but a torrent of emotions swirled inside her. Anger, fear, disbelief. "This is unlawful," she managed through clenched teeth, fighting to keep her composure. "I have done nothing wrong." Wilcox pressed her against the side of her SUV. "Quiet, you can explain it." Downtown, Lawson was standing to the side, silently watching. He was younger, maybe in his late 20s, and there was uncertainty in his eyes. Ebony saw his face in the reflection of her car's tinted window, a flash of guilt or at least discomfort. Yet he did nothing to intervene. Standing cuffed on the side of that dimly lit road, Ebony suddenly felt every ounce of the weight that had once lifted from her shoulders when she wore her uniform. In uniform, she was a revered general, a leader of thousands. Out of uniform, she was vulnerable to the prejudices of those who chose to see only her skin color. In that moment, Ebony did not know that this humiliating scene would ignite a chain of events that would shake the Crestwood Police Department to its core and reverberate all the way to the Pentagon. Sergeant Wilcox and Officer Lawson were about to learn a lesson, the hard way, a lesson that would cost them their careers and their reputations. By the time it was all over, the entire nation would hear the name Brigadier General Ebony Gardner, and those who dared to assault her dignity would come to regret it deeply. From an early age, Ebony showed an affinity for leadership. In high school, she led the debate team to regional championships, chaired committees, and always looked out for fellow students who struggled. After graduating with honors, she turned down multiple scholarship offers from top-tier universities to enroll in the U.S. Military Academy at West Point, determined to carve her path through service to her country. During her years at West Point, Ebony quickly established herself as a force. She excelled academically and physically, forging friendships that spanned diverse cultural and socio-economic backgrounds. She encountered sexism and racism, occasionally snide remarks, doubts about her capabilities, but Ebony remained steadfast. Her grace under pressure became legendary among her peers. In the face of adversity, she chose poise and relentless perseverance. She rose through the ranks after graduation, first leading a platoon in the Middle East during the surge years, where she proved her mettle under fire. Her superiors praised her for unwavering composure, even in the fiercest battles. Soldiers under her command realized they could trust her with their lives, and Ebony earned a reputation for fairness, discipline, and empathy. Over the years, Ebony performed multiple tours in different theaters of operation. Each time she returned, she found new ways to serve, volunteering for veterans programs, mentoring younger officers, and speaking at youth centers whenever she had the chance. Then came the day she was promoted to Brigadier General, a milestone that made Ebony one of the few black women to hold such a position in the entire U.S. Army. Photographs from that ceremony showed Ebony standing at attention bars gleaming on her shoulders, tears in her eyes, as her parents, her father in his wheelchair, her mother, standing proud, pinned her new rank. It was a moment that encapsulated the hopes of multiple generations. Despite her elevated rank, Ebony never lost touch with her roots. Each time she visited home, she'd pass by her old stomping grounds, the playground where she first learned about teamwork, the small library that kept her up at night, devouring books on history and leadership, and the community center that had shaped her worldview. Her activism in the local community continued, and so did her involvement in youth programs, where she taught about resilience, accountability, and the price of freedom. That night in Crestwood, Ebony had been giving a talk titled Courage Under Fire Leadership for the Next Generation. She concluded by telling the teenagers in the audience, "No matter where you come from, no matter what challenges you face, hard work, integrity, and a steadfast heart can open doors you never imagined, and always, always stand up for what is right." Little did she know that her own conviction would be tested just hours later on a lonely road outside town. For all the training, discipline, and authority Ebony possessed, the cruelty of prejudice still had the power to undermine everything in a matter of seconds. It was that stark reality she faced as the handcuffs clamped around her wrists. But Ebony was no ordinary target. She wasn't some vulnerable citizen who had no means to fight back. She was a decorated general in the U.S. Army with the direct number of staff inside the Pentagon stored in her phone and a personal relationship with many high-ranking officials who would not take lightly to seeing her mistreated. For Ebony, the mere act of calling superiors for help carried its own burden of responsibility. She knew she could wield enormous power with a single phone call, but she also believed in working within the system. She believed in justice, not revenge. Yet the anger was there, anger at having her rights violated, her dignity assaulted simply for driving while black, and ironically driving while being a general, unbeknownst to the officers who had cuffed her. Still handcuffed Ebony was taken downtown in the Crestwood Police Department squad car. The ride was short, but it felt like an eternity, Sergeant Wilcox hummed to himself, while Officer Lawson maintained an uneasy silence. The hush in the car was broken only by the crackle of the police radio and Ebony's measured breathing. Her mind whirled with questions. Why had they singled her out? Was this truly a random, suspicious vehicle? Stop, or had they decided she was guilty of something else the moment they saw her? She glanced out the window at the familiar sights of Crestwood Main Street, the old hardware store, the diner that served the best pancakes. She couldn't help feeling a jolt of betrayal. This was her home turf, a place she always believed still held a piece of her childhood innocence. It was surreal to be riding in the back seat of a squad car through these streets. Once they arrived at the station, the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a sterile glow on the scuffed linoleum floor. A few officers milling around the lobby stole curious glances at Ebony. Some recognized her face from local news segments, public service events, or perhaps from the army posters that occasionally featured her as a distinguished role model. Yet no one intervened. The tension was palpable, as if no one wanted to step into this mess without orders. Sergeant Wilcox led Ebony to a cramped interrogation room, unremarkable, except for the stale smell of old coffee and disinfectant. A single table and 2 chairs were positioned under a flickering light. Wilcox roughly guided her into the seat. Meanwhile, Lawson lingered by the door, avoiding eye contact. Ebony recalled the fleeting look of uncertainty she had seen in him. Maybe he wasn't entirely comfortable with what was happening. "I'm not sure why you're doing this," Ebony said calmly, focusing on Wilcox. "I've complied with everything you asked. Can I at least have a phone call?" "You can have your phone call when we're ready," Wilcox spat. "First, we're going to figure out who you really are." Ebony's jaw tensed. "You have my ID. My name is Brigadier General Ebony Gardner, United States Army. If you run my details, it will confirm my identity." Wilcox rolled his eyes, and Ebony felt a surge of anger bubble inside her. The utter disregard was shocking. He looked at Ebony as if she were a criminal, spinning a fantasy. She was used to a chain of command and respect for rank. Here, no such respect existed, only contempt. A second officer, a detective named Harris, entered the room. He wore a plain suit, and his manner suggested he was at least slightly more experienced than Wilcox. He placed a clipboard on the table and asked Ebony to state her name, address, and occupation. Ebony complied carefully, enunciating every word. As Ebony answered, Detective Harris checked her ID on a computer system. His eyes shifted from the screen to Ebony and back. Slowly, a look of realization settled over his face. He might have recognized the authenticity of her credentials, or perhaps he saw the flags pop up, indicating that Ebony was indeed a high-ranking Army officer. A flicker of discomfort crossed his features. "Is this accurate?" he murmured, turning the screen so Wilcox could see it. Wilcox's expression hardened, as though he didn't want to believe the information she was driving suspiciously. Wilcox said. His voice clipped. "We had reason to believe she might be involved in certain narcotics activity." Ebony almost laughed at the absurdity. "I'm a brigadier general," she repeated softly, the weight of her words filling the silence. "I was returning from a speaking engagement at the Crestwood Community Center. I have every right to be in this town at any hour." Detective Harris cleared his throat and began scribbling notes. He looked uneasily at Wilcox, then turned back to Ebony. "General Gardner, if that's truly who you are." Ebony's eyes flared with indignation. "I'm sure your system has already confirmed that I'd like my phone call now." Wilcox intervened. "We're going to hold you for further questioning until we sort this out." Ebony stared at him, her calm slowly eroding under the weight of blatant disrespect. "This is a massive overreach of your authority. I know my rights, and I know exactly who to call." There was a tense beat of silence. Wilcox seemed uncertain about his next move, but he clearly wasn't backing down. Without a word, he motioned for Lawson to take Ebony to a holding cell. As they left the interrogation room, Ebony looked over her shoulder at Detective Harris. She caught the detective's eyes, and in that brief moment she saw what looked like regret, or perhaps foreboding. It was as though he recognized the storm that was about to break. Ebony was led down a narrow corridor to a small cell with stark grey walls and a single metal bench. The door clanged shut behind her. She heard the lock engage a sharp click in the silence. The first thing she did was test the phone in her pocket, but naturally they had confiscated her personal items. She didn't even have a watch to track the time. She steeled herself. She might be here for a night, but if Wilcox and Lawson thought she would go quietly, they were mistaken. As Ebony stared at the drab walls, she pictured the bright flags fluttering over the main building at Fort Bragg. She pictured the soldiers training under her command, the youth who looked up to her. She refused to let fear or despair consume her. When she finally got her moment, she would make that call, and it would change everything. It was 3 hours before Ebony was given the chance to make a phone call. By that time, the early morning hours had arrived, and the station was quieter. Wilcox and Lawson were nowhere to be seen, but Detective Harris was present to supervise. He offered her a phone at the front desk, a sterile-looking landline with the police emblem on its cradle. Ebony noticed the cautious expression on Harris's face. He was clearly bracing himself for the fallout. Ebony dialed the number she knew by heart. It rang 4 times before a groggy voice answered. Bryson. Sir, this is General Ebony Gardner. Ebony kept her voice low, but it shook with tension. I'm in custody at the Crestwood Police Department. I believe I've been unlawfully detained. Silence thundered over the line for a heartbeat. Then came Bryson's response, awake now, every syllable sharp and precise. You're where Ebony laid out the events of the night. Succinctly her speaking engagement, the traffic stop, the handcuffs and the blatant disrespect. As she spoke, Detective Harris stepped back, folding his arms in discomfort. By the time Ebony finished, Bryson's voice was cold steel. Put the officer in charge on the line. Immediately, Ebony extended the receiver to Harris. He hesitated, but the unyielding look in her eyes left him no choice. Harris took the phone. As Ebony watched the detective's face drained of color, she heard Bryson's muffled but furious voice from across the room. Harris tried to interject once or twice, but Bryson steamrolled him. The conversation ended with a brusque, I expect General Gardner released without charges now. Then we'll discuss disciplinary action. Shaken Harris hung up. He turned to Ebony, gesturing for her to follow him away from the front desk and into a nearby office. The space was cramped with walls cluttered by wanted posters and departmental bulletins. A single desk lamp cast an amber glow. General Harris began clearing his throat. We realize there may have been an error. Ebony repeated, incredulous. I was falsely detained, handcuffed, and thrown into a cell. Harris grimaced. Look, I'm trying to make this right. Let's process your release, and I'll file the necessary reports. The department may place Wilcox on administrative leave while this is investigated. Ebony inhaled her anger, threatening to overwhelm her, but she took a moment to steady herself. This was a critical juncture. I appreciate that you're taking steps, Detective, but this is far beyond a minor infraction. My civil rights were violated. Harris nodded, swallowing hard. I understand. You're free to leave now. The booking charges, they were never officially filed. Ebony echoed, almost laughing at the irony. They had thrown her in a cell under the pretense of questioning without doing the paperwork. That alone pointed to a shady operation. I'll leave. But this is not over. Harris gestured apologetically. I have no authority to stop any complaint you lodge, and I'll cooperate with the inquiry. Let me just finalize your paperwork, still wearing her civilian clothes. Ebony gathered her belongings from a plastic bag at the reception counter. Her phone was there, notifications piling up. As she scrolled through messages, Ebony's chest tightened. She had missed calls from the community center staff, her aunt, and even some from Colonel Rosemary Neville. A close friend who served under her word was getting out. There were frantic texts asking if she was okay, and references to you getting arrested. Ebony realized the rumor mill was already churning. Outside the station, the faint glow of dawn tinted the horizon. The air was damp and smelled of dew on concrete. Ebony paused on the steps, looking back at the building, its facade of chipped bricks, the Crestwood Police Department sign that was half hidden by an overgrown bush. She had come here once for a community police outreach program years ago. Now it seemed like a fortress of injustice. In the parking lot, Ebony saw her SUV parked off to the side. The keys were nowhere in sight. Inside, she spotted Lawson, who approached hesitantly with the key fob in hand. Here, ma'am," he said, lowering his head. "Sergeant Wilcox took them. I got them back. I'm sorry about what happened." Ebony accepted the fob. "Why didn't you speak up when this was happening?" He shrugged, a mixture of shame and fear crossing his features. "Well, Wilcox is my superior. He said we had a tip. I was just following orders." Ebony finished for him, her tone gently reproachful. "Officer Lawson, there's a difference between orders and morally wrong actions. If you want to uphold that badge with integrity, learn that difference." Lawson's shoulders sagged. He offered no defense as Ebony walked past him, got into her SUV, and drove away from the station. The route to her aunt's house was familiar, but each landmark felt different. Now Crestwood's early morning hush seemed charged with a new tension, as though the entire town braced for a storm. By the time she arrived at her aunt's small cottage, a cozy white bungalow with a wraparound porch, the sun was peeking over the horizon. Her aunt, Lydia Gardner, greeted her on the porch with a worried expression. "Oh, my Lord, Ebony. What in the world happened?" Lydia's eyes were red-rimmed. She hadn't slept. Ebony recounted the story in clipped phrases, still riding the adrenaline rush. Lydia's outrage mounted with every sentence. "I told you years ago those cops had problems, didn't I? They've been harassing young folks for ages." Ebony nodded soberly. "This time they've gone too far, Aunt Lydia." Over the next few hours, Ebony's phone buzzed non-stop. Calls from her army colleagues, from local activists, from old friends who had heard rumors. She fielded each one, carefully explaining that she was safe, but a single text from Major General Bryson stood out. Pentagon fully informed, legal and PR teams mobilized. "We have your back." That was all Ebony needed to read. She knew the avalanche had begun. The next move, ironically, was not hers. It would come from the Pentagon, the Department of Defense, and a media firestorm that would soon descend upon Crestwood. Yes, Ebony would play her part. She planned to file a formal complaint, meet with attorneys, and speak her truth to the press. But she was also aware that this was bigger than her personal injustice. This was about systemic issues, about how easily a public servant could be reduced to a stereotype. If it could happen to a brigadier general, Ebony knew it could happen to anyone. She resolved to handle this battle with the same dignity and resilience that had carried her through every challenge in her life. Meanwhile, at the police station, the tremors of Ebony's phone call had already begun. Sergeant Wilcox was being called into the chief's office. Officer Lawson hovered in the hallway, uncertain if his own future was on the line. Detective Harris braced himself for inquiries and internal reviews, and everyone on that force, who had turned a blind eye over the years, suddenly felt the harsh light of accountability shining in their eyes. The next day dawned bright and scorching. Ebony woke up in her aunt's house after a fitful 2-hour nap, phone already vibrating with a barrage of messages. She scrolled through them, updates from Colonel Neville, a text from Major General Bryson asking to call him as soon as she was awake, and several from reporters requesting interviews. Overnight, Ebony's unlawful detention by the Crestwood PD had become national news, carried by the local press, and then picked up by larger outlets, hungry for a sensational story. Ebony called Bryson first General Gardner. He said, voice crisp, "We're bringing a legal team down. The Department of the Army's Public Affairs Office is drafting a statement. but we want you to decide how to proceed. This is your fight as much as it is ours." Ebony had never been so grateful for her military family. "Thank you, sir. I want to see justice done, but I also want to shine a light on the deeper issue. This kind of racial profiling." Bryson's tone softened. "Understood. For now, rest assured, we're supporting you fully. We're sending a liaison officer to coordinate with local authorities. We don't want to overstep into civilian matters, but we also can't ignore the indignity you suffered. Crestwood PD will have to answer for this." Ebony ended the call and immediately dialed Colonel Neville, who confirmed that Ebony's story had gone viral. Social media was aflame with outraged posts, memes of a general behind bars and calls for Sergeant Wilcox's resignation. Civil rights organizations were already denouncing the incident, calling it a textbook case of racial profiling. Meanwhile, Ebony's aunt bustled around the kitchen, making a hearty breakfast of grits, eggs, and bacon. "Girl, you need some food in you," Aunt Lydia insisted, pushing a plate toward Ebony. "You're not going into battle on an empty stomach." Ebony mustered a small smile, her appetite almost non-existent due to nerves. But she dutifully spooned some grits. The aroma was comforting, a reminder of simpler times, shortly after Ebony's phone rang again. This time, it was the mayor of Crestwood, Lisa Madison. Ebony raised an eyebrow as she answered the call. "General Gardner." The mayor began, her tone formal, yet strained. "I want to extend my sincerest apologies for the incident last night. I'm requesting a meeting at City Hall to discuss next steps. We want to handle this swiftly and justly." Ebony's voice tightened. "Madam Mayor, I appreciate you reaching out. But you must understand that this isn't merely a public relations problem. I was unlawfully detained and humiliated by your officers." Mayor Madison sighed. "I understand. The city and the police department are prepared to do what's necessary to make this right. We're launching an internal affairs investigation immediately." Ebony paused, considering. "Very well, I'll meet with you, but I'll be bringing my legal counsel and representatives from the army." After hanging up, Ebony steeled herself. She could sense the frantic damage control happening behind the scenes. The police chief, the mayor, the city council. Everyone was desperate to contain the fallout, but Ebony had no intention of letting it be swept under the rug. This was an opportunity to drive real change, not just for herself, but for all the people who had ever been harassed or profiled by those who swore to protect and serve. A couple of hours later, Ebony arrived at City Hall in her civilian clothes, accompanied by an Army attorney, Captain Blair Thompson, and a Pentagon liaison officer named Lieutenant Colonel William Singer. Singer was a tall, imposing man with a stern demeanor, well-versed in navigating bureaucratic mazes. Thompson, on the other hand, was a meticulous legal mind who specialized in military-related civil rights cases. Their arrival caused a stir among the staff, and media crowded outside the building. Cameras flashed, and reporters shouted questions. "General Gardner, how do you feel about last night's incident? Are you pressing charges? Is the Pentagon going to sue Crestwood PD?" Ebony calmly answered one question. "I trust due process will prevail. I'm here to ensure accountability." She didn't break stride, heading straight into the meeting. Inside, Mayor Madison, police chief, Harold Mills, and City Attorney Jared Park awaited them in a conference room, ringed with wood paneling and official emblems. A faint smell of lemon polish hung in the air. Everyone stood as Ebony entered. The mayor gestured to a seat at the head of the long table. "General Gardner." "Thank you for coming," Mayor Madison began. Her voice trembled slightly, revealing her anxiety. We want to express our regret over the events that transpired." Chief Mills cleared his throat, glancing at Ebony, as though he were hoping for some form of forgiveness. "I've already placed Sergeant Wilcox on administrative leave, pending the outcome of an internal investigation. Officer Lawson is also under review." Ebony nodded, but her expression remained cool. "I appreciate that, but this isn't just about the two officers. There's a systemic issue at play. What steps are you taking to ensure this doesn't happen again, to me or anyone else?" The city attorney, Jared Park, interjected. "We're open to discussing policy changes, additional training, and potentially a public apology. We just ask for your patience as we sort through the legalities." Captain Thompson cleared her throat. "General Gardner's patience is not in question. We're here to establish accountability and discuss what measures the city will implement to prevent further violations of constitutional rights, also to address potential legal remedies for the harm already done." Ebony glanced at Thompson, grateful for the attorney's directness. But what she really wanted to hear was a commitment to lasting reform. "This can't just be about apologies and hush money. I was profiled. I could have been anyone, just another black driver. They decided looked suspicious. Has it occurred to you how many others might have suffered the same treatment without recourse?" Mayor Madison swallowed, casting a nervous glance at Chief Mills. Mills shifted in his seat. "We have zero tolerance for racism in our department," he said, though the word sounded more rehearsed than heartfelt. "But we do need to let the investigation run its course." Lieutenant Colonel Singer leaned forward, addressing the mayor and chief. "The Department of the Army takes the unlawful detention of a brigadier general very seriously. We are concerned about the climate that allowed this to happen. I strongly advise you to cooperate fully, because if you don't, the repercussions could go beyond just local headlines." A nerve twitched in the chief's jaw as he realized the gravity of the situation. Mayor Madison interlocked her fingers, her voice wavering. "We're prepared to cooperate fully, General Gardner. We will hold a press conference this afternoon to address the incident. We'd be honored if you'd attend and share a statement." Ebony considered the offer. A public forum could help shift the narrative, but it also risked turning into a spectacle. She wanted to ensure her voice was used to highlight the broader issue of racial profiling. "Very well," Ebony said. "But I intend to speak frankly about what happened." The mayor nodded gratefully. Though she looked worried about what Ebony's frankness might entail, the meeting concluded with an agreement that Ebony would attend the press conference, while the city and the army representatives began hammering out a framework for accountability measures. No one could say precisely where this would lead, but one fact was abundantly clear. Crestwood's leadership was in crisis management mode, and Ebony's determination would not be easily placated by half measures. As Ebony and her team exited City Hall, the press clamored for details. She held up a hand, stating only, "We'll address everything at the press conference." "Thank you." While Ebony spoke, she couldn't help but remember the sense of shock and helplessness she felt in that holding cell. That moment still fueled her resolve. She refused to be just another statistic, another footnote in the long history of racial injustice. She had the rank, the platform, and the moral fortitude to turn her personal ordeal into a catalyst for real change. And she intended to seize that opportunity with everything she had. The press conference was scheduled for 2 p.m. on the steps of City Hall. In the hours leading up to it, Ebony learned more about Sergeant Ray Wilcox and Officer Kurt Lawson from the Army's investigative staff, who had quietly begun combing through available records and speaking with local contacts. What surfaced painted a troubling picture of law enforcement culture in Crestwood. Wilcox, a 10-year veteran of the force, had multiple complaints lodged against him, most never investigated. The allegations ranged from verbal harassment to excessive use of force, particularly against black residents in Crestwood's lower-income neighborhoods. Rumors circulated that he had strong ties to a clique within the department known for its aggressive policing tactics. While official records were sealed, Ebony's Pentagon contacts unearthed enough to confirm that Wilcox's track record was far from unblemished. Officer Lawson, on the other hand, had only been on the force 2 years. He was reputed to be a follower, rather than a leader, often playing second fiddle to senior officers. People who knew him described him as young and impressionable. Ebony reflected on the slight remorse she had seen in his eyes. Perhaps he'd been swept along by a toxic environment, though it did not absolve him of responsibility for her unlawful detention. Meanwhile, Ebony's phone continued to blow up. Strangers wrote her messages of support on social media. Some thanked her for bringing attention to the systematic abuse they had faced for years in Crestwood. Others spewed hateful comments, accusing Ebony of pulling rank or fabricating the story for fame. Ebony deleted the vitriol without a second thought. She had faced worse in her lifetime, and she refused to be distracted by trolls. Early in the afternoon, Ebony drove to the community center, where she had given her leadership talk just days ago. The building was a modest single-story brick structure, but it served as a beacon of hope for many youths. The center's director, Marlon Hayes, greeted her at the entrance. He looked both relieved and furious. "General, I can't believe what they did to you. After everything you've done for this town." Ebony placed a hand on his shoulder. "We're turning it into something positive. Marlon, we have to." Inside, she met a group of teenagers who had attended her talk. They were the same wide-eyed kids she had told, always stand up for what's right. Now they crowded around her, some tearful, some angry, one girl. Tamika blurted, "I'm so sorry they did that to you, ma'am. If they can do it to someone like you, what hope do the rest of us have?" Ebony's heart squeezed. She knelt down to Tamika's level, speaking softly. "Listen, you have every bit of hope. If this can happen to me, I'll stand by you. So it won't happen again. We fight this together." Their words energized Ebony. She decided to invite some of them to the press conference, wanting the city to see the faces of the next generation. Young people forced to grow up under the shadow of unjust policing. It was for them as much as for herself that Ebony intended to speak out. As the clock neared 2, Ebony headed back to City Hall. The area was a circus of cameras, reporters, and local citizens who came to witness the historic moment. Ebony was aware that her presence represented not just her own story, but the stories of countless others who never had the platform or rank to demand accountability. A makeshift podium stood at the top of the steps, flanked by Mayor Madison and Police Chief Mills. The mayor stepped up, first nervously tapping the microphone. Her face glistened with sweat under the unforgiving sun. "Good afternoon, everyone. We're here to address the unfortunate incident involving Brigadier General Ebony Gardner. The city of Crestwood takes this matter seriously and is conducting a thorough investigation." She proceeded with a rehearsed statement, expressing regret and promising to uphold the highest standards in the police department. Chief Mills then took the mic, offering a similarly cautious speech. He mentioned administrative leave for Wilcox and Lawson, an internal affairs probe, and a renewed commitment to racial sensitivity training. Both statements sounded like typical public relations fare, carefully crafted and devoid of the raw emotion many citizens wanted to hear. Then the mayor turned to Ebony General Gardner. "If you'd like to say a few words." Ebony stepped forward, scanning the crowd. She spotted the teenagers from the community center, standing at the edge of the gathering. Their expressions were hopeful, as if waiting for a champion to speak truth. Ebony inhaled, letting the tension settle. She was used to addressing soldiers on matters of life and death, but this felt equally pivotal. "Thank you, Madam Mayor," she began. Her voice carried a firm, commanding presence honed by years of military service. "I stand here today, not just as a brigadier general, but as a citizen of this country who was wrongfully detained. I stand here as a black woman who experienced racial profiling, who was cuffed, thrown into a cell, and denied basic respect." Her voice rose, resonating through the microphones. "But I'm not here to focus solely on my own ordeal. I am here for every black man, woman, and child in Crestwood and across America who has faced similar treatment. Some have faced worse. Many never received an apology or a platform to speak." She paused, eyes scanning the faces around her, from city officials to reporters to ordinary citizens. "When I served overseas, I fought for the freedoms we hold dear. The right to due process, the right to be treated with dignity, the right to live without fear of oppression. Those freedoms should not be violated here at home." The crowd erupted in applause. Some cheering Ebony waited for the noise to ebb before continuing. "I appreciate the city's swift response, but I want more than an internal probe. We need systemic change, mandatory body cameras for all officers, transparent procedures for stop and frisk, and robust accountability measures when officers act outside the law. We need community outreach programs that foster trust rather than fear." Her tone softened, though it lost none of its intensity. "I call upon every citizen of Crestwood to stand up for what is right, to demand better from those sworn to protect us. Let us not settle for half measures or empty promises. Let us create lasting reform that ensures no one else endures what I endured." The applause thundered once more, mixing with shouts of support. Several people chanted Ebony's name, while others raised signs calling for Wilcox's firing and chanting slogans like, "Justice for all." The mayor stood by, trying to keep her composure, though it was clear Ebony's speech had overshadowed the official statements. Chief Mills wore a guarded expression, no doubt realizing the tidal wave of scrutiny that was about to crash over his department. In the aftermath of the press conference, Ebony found herself surrounded by reporters asking follow-up questions. She answered politely but firmly, reiterating that she trusted an external investigation more than an internal one. She would cooperate with any legitimate inquiry, but also planned to speak with civil rights groups about a broader approach to police accountability. That evening, local and national news aired segments of Ebony's speech, calling it powerful, historic, and a rallying cry for police reform. On social media, hashtags related to Ebony's name and Crestwood PD trended nationwide. The spotlight was now fixed on this small town, and Ebony knew that the real work was only beginning. While the media storm continued, Ebony retreated to her aunt's house, longing for a moment of peace. As she parked her SUV, she noticed a familiar figure waiting on the porch, Detective Harris. He looked uncomfortable as he stood there, hat in hand. Ebony braced herself, wondering if he came to deliver an apology, or if this was some sort of clandestine police outreach. General Gardner Harris said, his voice subdued. "I just wanted you to know. There's something going on in the department you should be aware of. I can't talk about it here. But let's just say, Wilcox isn't the only one who should be under scrutiny." Ebony narrowed her eyes. Her interest piqued. "Why are you telling me this?" Harris shrugged, glancing around as if worried someone might be watching. "Because it's the right thing to do. And because I've seen things swept under the rug for far too long. If you want to root out the problem, you need to dig deeper." Leaving it at that, Harris handed Ebony a small folded piece of paper. "Call me if you want details, but be careful who you trust." With that cryptic warning, The detective stepped off the porch and disappeared into the night, leaving Ebony holding the piece of paper with his private number scrawled on it. A sense of foreboding tugged at her. Could it be that the entire Crestwood PD was rife with corruption, or at least riddled with complicit silence? Whatever the case, Ebony felt more determined than ever to see this through. She had come too far to let fear or intimidation stop her now. No sooner had Detective Harris vanished than Ebony's phone buzzed. Colonel Neville was on the line, her voice resonating with urgency. "General, I just got word from Intel. They found something about Wilcox's connections to a fringe group, possibly extremist. We're verifying now Ebony's blood ran cold. The possibility that the officer who detained her was involved with extremist elements made the situation even more disturbing. It also explained the deeper undercurrent of malice during the stop. Send me whatever you have, Colonel, and keep this confidential until we verify." She ended the call and glanced at the folded paper Detective Harris had given her. Was this what he had been referring to? Ebony realized the situation might be more complex and more dangerous than she had initially thought. In all her years of service, she had dealt with insurgent cells, terror threats, and even espionage. She never expected to uncover extremist ties in her own backyard. Ebony sat in her aunt's living room, the hum of the air conditioner filling the silence. She toyed with the piece of paper before deciding to dial Harris. It rang twice before he picked up. "Harris here. It's General Gardner," Ebony said quietly, double-checking that her aunt was out of earshot. "You said there's more I need to know. I have intelligence suggesting Wilcox might be connected to extremist circles." Harris exhaled, clearly unsettled. "I can't confirm that. But it wouldn't surprise me. Wilcox has always been, how should I put this, radical in his views. I've heard talk from other officers, unofficial of course, that he's associated with a local militia group calling themselves the True Patriots. They're mostly talk, but rumor is they do paramilitary drills out in the woods." Ebony's stomach knotted. She recalled her father's stories about returning from Vietnam to a polarized nation, about domestic groups that sometimes spat on veterans or used them as pawns. The idea that a police officer might be moonlighting with an extremist militia was sobering, but it was hardly unprecedented. Why didn't anyone do anything about it? Ebony asked. Harris laughed grimly. "Small-town politics, General. And he's got friends in high places. You start poking, you end up with a target on your back. Most folks are content to let sleeping dogs lie." Ebony leaned forward, voice calm but determined. "I'm not most folks. I want to see justice. And if Wilcox is part of something bigger, we need to expose it." Harris hesitated, then said, "Meet me tomorrow night at the old rail yard on the outskirts of town near mile marker 6. I'll bring documentation, complaints records, maybe even some photos. But I can't be seen with you in public. This has to be off the books." The conversation ended there. Ebony slid her phone onto the coffee table, letting the weight of this new development settle in. She stared at the curtains, thinking about how she had come to Crestwood for a simple speaking engagement, only to find herself unraveling a web of corruption and potential extremism. Perhaps this was divine providence, a chance for Ebony to serve her country in another kind of fight, this time on domestic soil. That night, Ebony struggled to sleep. She checked on her aunt, who was resting peacefully, then sat on the porch listening to the crickets and sipping a glass of iced tea. She replayed the entire ordeal in her mind. The stop, the interrogation, the phone call to the Pentagon, the press conference, Harris's cryptic hints. She thought of all the men and women who never received an apology or had the Army's support to back them up. How many innocent people had Wilcox terrorized? How many times had the department turned a blind eye by dawn? Ebony had made up her mind. She would meet with Harris, gather the evidence, and ensure it reached both the Army's investigative arms and any federal authority willing to act. She would not be intimidated, nor would she settle for cosmetic changes. The sense of purpose electrified her, reminiscent of her early days in the military, when she believed one determined individual could make a difference. The following day was tense. The media continued to swirl around Crestwood, with more journalists arriving to cover the unfolding scandal. Sergeant Wilcox was notably absent, presumably sequestered at home while on leave. Ebony avoided further public appearances, opting to handle the behind-the-scenes aspects of the investigation. Late in the afternoon, Colonel Neville arrived from Fort Bragg. They convened in Aunt Lydia's living room, along with Captain Thompson and Lieutenant Colonel Singer. Neville opened a manila folder, spreading out documents across the dining room table. We've confirmed multiple allegations against Wilcox, including an incident 2 years ago, where he physically assaulted a young black man. No charges were filed suspiciously. The Army Intelligence Branch can't confirm the militia connection yet, but we're working on it. Ebony nodded. Tonight, I'm meeting a local detective who claims to have more evidence. Singer frowned. Is it safe for you to go alone? We can arrange discreet security. Ebony considered it, but the more people she brought, the more it might scare off Harris. I'll bring one person, maybe you, Colonel Neville, but we should keep it minimal. I don't want to spook him. So it was decided. As dusk descended on Crestwood Ebony and Neville climbed into Ebony's SUV, they left the city lights behind, navigating a winding, unpaved road that led to the old rail yard. Rusting boxcars and overgrown weeds littered the site, an eerie tableau under the faint moonlight. They found Detective Harris leaning against an abandoned freight car, looking uneasy. A single lantern illuminated a stack of old files on a small folding table. Ebony parked a short distance away. She and Neville approached cautiously. Harris exhaled in relief when he saw them. "Glad you came," he muttered. "I brought copies of official complaints that never made it past the chief's desk. There's also a thumb drive with voice recordings, a whistleblower inside the department who caught Wilcox bragging about certain enforcement tactics." Ebony flipped through the papers, her pulse quickening. They contained horrifying accounts of people, mostly from Crestwood's black community, being detained, beaten, or harassed. Many had tried to file formal complaints, only for them to be dismissed or lost. Ebony's heart clenched in anger and sadness. "These are legitimate?" she asked, her voice low but urgent. Harris nodded. "I verified them. There are dozens more that never got documented. Look, Wilcox has dirt on several high-ranking people. That's how he's stayed untouchable. He also has a personal friend in the state legislature who's rumored to be sympathetic to extremist ideologies." Colonel Neville's eyes flickered with disbelief. "This is beyond a local issue. We're looking at a potential network of corruption." Harris sighed. "I wish I could do more officially, but I'm risking my career just by being here. If the chief finds out, I'm finished. And it's not just the chief. There are people in City Hall who want to sweep this under the rug, especially with all the media attention on the General." Ebony placed a reassuring hand on Harris's shoulder. "You're doing the right thing. I'll make sure this evidence finds its way to the right agencies." As they spoke, a sudden noise echoed a distant crunch of gravel. Ebony's instincts flared. She motioned for the others to kill the lantern. Peering through the darkness, she spotted headlights on a far-off access road. "Are you followed?" Neville whispered, hand instinctively moving near her side, as though she was still armed. Harris shook his head vigorously. "I don't think so." But the headlights grew closer, sweeping across the abandoned rail yard. Ebony's mind raced. If it was Wilcox or his associates, They might not hesitate to use violence. She quickly gathered the files and the thumb drive, stuffing them into a backpack. They ducked behind a derelict freight car. Seconds later, another vehicle entered the rail yard, its engine rumbling. Ebony pressed her back against the cold steel of the boxcar, adrenaline coursing through her. She listened intently. A car door opened and slammed shut. Footsteps crunched on gravel. Then a harsh voice sliced through the night. "Harris, I know you're here, you sniveling coward. Show yourself." Ebony exchanged a glance with Neville, both instantly recognizing the voice Sergeant Wilcox's heart pounding. Ebony turned to see Wilcox's silhouette in the headlights, a dark shape scanning the area. He seemed agitated, armed with a pistol at his side. Harris's eyes widened in terror. Ebony mouthed, "Stay calm." She fished for her phone, intending to call 911, but realized it would take time for any help to arrive. A confrontation seemed unavoidable. Wilcox's voice echoed again, dripping with anger. "You think I don't know what you're doing? Harris, traitor. I got a tip you were meeting that fancy general out here. You two better come out before I make you." Come out. Ebony's grip on her phone tightened. If it came down to it, she would have to reveal herself. But she had no weapon, no immediate backup beyond Colonel Neville, who was similarly unarmed off duty. Before Ebony could decide, Wilcox fired a shot into the air. The thunderous crack reverberated among the abandoned cars. Harris flinched, a whimper escaping him. Colonel Neville clenched her jaw, whispering urgently, "We can't let him keep shooting. That bullet could ricochet or hit someone." She turned to Ebony. "If he sees you, maybe he'll back down." Ebony swallowed her fear and straightened, bracing herself. Taking a deep breath, she stepped out from behind the boxcar, facing Wilcox. Her posture was erect, as though she wore her uniform with all its authority. "Sergeant Wilcox," she called, her voice echoing in the night air. "Put the gun down." Wilcox spun to face her. His features were barely visible under the harsh glare of his headlights, but Ebony saw the twisted sneer on his face. Well, the big shot, General." Ebony raised her empty hands. "You don't want to do this. Whatever you came here for, it's over. We have evidence of your misconduct. You need to put that weapon down and surrender." A tense silence stretched. Wilcox let out a derisive laugh. "You think you can scare me, lady? I've been dealing with your kind for years. You might have the media and your army buddies, but out here I'm the law." Ebony's pulse thundered. She fought to keep her voice calm, though every nerve in her body screamed at her to act. "No, Wilcox, you are a criminal. The law is something you betrayed." For a moment, Ebony feared Wilcox would raise the weapon and pull the trigger. Then something shifted in his eyes. Doubt, maybe fear. Before he could decide, the wail of sirens tore through the night. Blue and red lights flickered on the horizon. Wilcox's eyes went wide. He spun around. Cursing, Ebony realized backup had arrived. Someone must have alerted the authorities. Maybe Harris had sent a silent alarm, or perhaps a passerby heard the gunshot. Wilcox scrambled to get into his car. He sped off, tires squealing in a cloud of dust. Ebony and Neville emerged, fully watching the tail lights vanish. Moments later, 2 patrol cars barreled into the rail yard, uniformed officers pouring out with weapons drawn. Ebony raised her hands once more, identifying herself. As they cautiously approached, Harris did the same. After a tense minute of explanations, the officers recognized Ebony and lowered their weapons. What happened here demanded one officer looking rattled. "We got a report of a gunshot." Ebony quickly summarized the situation. The officer radioed for more units. Meanwhile, Ebony caught Harris's gaze. He still trembled, but managed a small nod. They both knew that the cat was out of the bag. Wilcox had gone rogue, and Ebony had the evidence to bring him down. The question now was whether the rest of the department would join the fight for justice or close ranks around their rogue sergeant. As the swirl of flashing lights, questions, and official procedures enveloped them, Ebony clutched the backpack of incriminating files close to her chest. Tonight had been a brush with real danger, but she also felt a sense of resolve harden within her. She had come too far to back down now. Whatever it took, she would ensure that Wilcox and the culture that protected him faced the full might of accountability. The following days were a whirlwind of law enforcement investigations, media coverage, and community outrage. Sergeant Wilcox went on the run, evading immediate capture, but leaving behind a trail of damning evidence. The files and recordings Detective Harris provided, combined with Ebony's first-hand testimony of Wilcox's threat at the rail yard, proved more than enough for a multi-agency task force to launch a formal manhunt. FBI involvement became inevitable once extremist ties were suspected. In Crestwood, the tide turned decisively. Chief Mills announced he would be retiring effective immediately, as more revelations about ignored complaints and alleged cover-ups surfaced. Internal affairs investigations implicated several other officers in Wilcox's circle for participating in or concealing acts of brutality. Officer Lawson, to his partial credit, cooperated with investigators testifying about Wilcox's manipulative tactics. Meanwhile, Ebony's unwavering stand and subsequent revelations inspired residents of Crestwood to speak openly about their own encounters with racial profiling and police harassment. The local newspaper ran a special series called Unspoken Injustices, featuring interviews with victims who had once been too afraid to come forward. Town halls erupted with passionate pleas for reform, demanding civilian oversight and comprehensive anti-bias training. Ebony stayed in Crestwood through most of it, determined to see the process through. She coordinated closely with the FBI and Army intelligence, sharing every piece of evidence Harris had given her. At the same time, Ebony continued her community outreach, visiting schools, churches, and the community center to reassure people that justice was not just a lofty idea, but a tangible goal. To the teens she had mentored, Ebony's resolve was a guiding light. The break in the case came a week later. Acting on a tip, federal agents tracked Wilcox to a remote cabin in the Appalachian foothills. A tense standoff ensued, ending with Wilcox in handcuffs after a brief exchange of gunfire that left him with a wounded shoulder. No officers were harmed. The image of a sullen, injured Wilcox being loaded into an armored vehicle flashed across news channels nationwide. The man who once sneered at Ebony as the big-shot general now wore his own set of shackles. For Ebony, the news brought both relief and a surge of emotion. She felt vindicated, yet burdened by the reality that Wilcox's arrest was only the start of a long judicial process. Still, the symbolism was potent. The man who had so confidently trampled on the rights of others had come face to face with justice and lost. In the days after Wilcox's capture, Ebony found herself repeatedly approached by local citizens, black, white, Latino, old, young, who thanked her. One elderly woman, tears in her eyes, clutched Ebony's hands outside a grocery store. "I've lived here all my life, child, and never thought I'd see this day. Bless you for standing up to them." Back at City Hall, the mayor called a special session, inviting Ebony to attend as a guest of honor. The council proposed a series of sweeping reforms: mandatory body-worn cameras for all officers, a citizens' review board with subpoena power, and a zero-tolerance policy for hate group affiliations. Ebony gave a short, heartfelt speech endorsing the measures. The resolution passed unanimously. When Ebony stepped outside after the session, she was met with cheering crowds. News cameras captured the moment she waved tears threatening to spill. The atmosphere felt electric, a sense that the community had united to confront a dark chapter, and now stood at the cusp of renewal. Detective Harris quietly slipped through the throng to stand beside her. He'd been suspended pending investigation for meeting Ebony off the books, but public pressure and Ebony's own testimony about his courage had softened the department's stance. "Looks like you got what you wanted," he said softly. "Real change." Ebony turned to face him. "We did it. You took a risk. You should be proud of yourself." Harris managed a faint smile. "Part of me wonders if there's a place for me in this department after everything. But maybe that's why I should stay. Change comes from within." "Right," Ebony nodded, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Exactly. This department needs good officers." Yet Ebony knew the work was never done. Beyond Crestwood, the world still teemed with injustice, prejudice, and corruption. But this victory proved that even the most entrenched systems could be challenged, and that sometimes it only took one voice to spark an entire chorus calling for change. In the end, Brigadier General Ebony Gardner's story became a testament to the power of standing up for what's right. No matter the risks, no matter the opposition. She turned her personal ordeal into a clarion call, exposing deep-rooted injustice within Crestwood's police department and inspiring a community to demand lasting reform. Her resilience and courage illuminated a simple but profound truth. When one person refuses to accept oppression, it can ignite a revolution of conscience. Now we invite you to carry her message forward. If her story moved you, if her fight against corruption and racial profiling stirred your sense of justice, like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Help amplify General Gardner's incredible journey so that it may inspire others to stand against prejudice and advocate for meaningful change wherever it is needed most. Thank you for watching, and remember, together we can be the change.